The generation that was told, "Go outside and be home when the streetlights come on," is now being told they're too involved in their children's lives. And that contradiction, it explains almost everything about Gen X parents. If you grew up in the late 60s, 70s, or early 80s, you probably remember something very specific: the sound of a front door unlocking in an empty house. No one asking how your day was, no one checking your homework, just silence. A quiet kind of independence that didn't feel dramatic at the time, but shaped you in ways you were still unpacking. Between 1970 and 1990, the percentage of mothers with children under 6 participating in the workforce rose from roughly 37% to nearly 60%, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. It was the first time in modern history that this many households had 2 working parents at scale. And Gen X felt that shift directly. They became what culture later called latchkey kids, not neglected in a cinematic sense, not abused in the dramatic sense, but left to figure things out. You made your own snacks, you solved your own friendship drama, you handled your own academic disappointments. There was an unspoken rule: deal with it. Researchers at Reach Advisors once described Gen X as one of the least parented, least nurtured generations in modern American history. And while that phrasing sounds harsh, many Gen X adults quietly nod when they hear it, because it's not that their parents didn't love them, it's that love at the time looked like survival. Their parents were navigating inflation, economic shifts, cultural upheaval, divorce spikes, and changing gender roles. Emotional presence wasn't the primary currency, stability was. So, Gen X internalized something powerful. Independence equals safety, autonomy equals strength. Need less, expect less, handle more, and that independence did create resilience. It built problem-solving skills. It built adaptability. But it also built something subtler: emotional self-sufficiency, the kind that looks strong from the outside, but can feel lonely on the inside. Fast forward to now, Gen X parents are raising kids in a completely different world, and something interesting is happening. They're more involved than their parents were, but they're not hovering the way stereotypes suggest. Some people call them stealth fighter parents, meaning they're not always visible. They're not micromanaging every second. They'll let their kids struggle through minor issues. But when something truly matters, they show up with intensity. A meeting with a principal, a serious social issue, a health concern. They go all in. And that behavior makes sense when you understand their psychology. Because when you've grown up wondering whether anyone would come if you needed them, you become the kind of parent who quietly promises, "My child will never wonder that." Here's where psychology gives us language for what's happening. Developmental psychologist Diana Baumrind spent years studying parenting styles. She discovered that parenting could be understood along 2 core dimensions: warmth, emotional responsiveness, and demandingness, structure, and expectations. From that framework, she identified 4 styles: authoritarian, permissive, neglectful, and authoritative. Authoritative parenting, high warmth and high structure, consistently shows the healthiest outcomes in children. Higher self-esteem, better emotional regulation, stronger academic performance, lower anxiety and depression. It's the "I love you, and there are still rules" model. There isn't one massive study proving Gen X collectively adopted this style. But when you listen to how they talk about parenting, something becomes clear. They want to be emotionally present, but they also believe struggle builds character. They don't want to suffocate their children, but they also don't want them to feel alone. They're trying to balance the independence they valued with the emotional availability they missed. And that balancing act is psychologically exhausting, because Gen X didn't just grow up independent, they grew up skeptical. They entered adulthood during recessions. They watched pensions disappear. They saw the promise of lifelong job security dissolve. They learned early that institutions don't always protect you. So when they parent, they're not just preparing their kids for a stable system, they're preparing them for instability. That creates a specific kind of parenting philosophy. You won't always be protected. So I'll teach you how to protect yourself, but here's the twist. They're doing all of this in the age of social media. Gen X remembers life before the internet, before smartphones, before permanent digital records of every awkward moment. They had boredom, real boredom. They had unstructured afternoons where creativity was survival. They know what privacy feels like because they experienced it. So when they set screen boundaries, it's not fear-based, It's memory-based. They're not anti-technology. They're bilingual in analog and digital worlds, but they question the cost. And this tension adds another layer of pressure, because Gen X is also the sandwich generation. They're caring for aging baby boomer parents while raising Gen Z or Gen Alpha children. Their parents often say, "You're coddling those kids." Their kids sometimes say, "You're too strict." And Gen X stands in the middle, translating between two value systems that don't speak the same language. Emotionally, that's heavy. You're trying to keep the resilience of the past, while adding the empathy the past lacked. And this shows up in subtle ways. Gen X parents often don't chase external validation for their parenting. They don't obsessively compare themselves online. They don't publicly perform parenting for approval in the same way younger generations sometimes do. Why? Because their childhood taught them something fundamental. External validation is unreliable. So they parent from an internal compass. That means they let their teenager fail a test twice, because they believe repetition builds learning. But they'll also be awake at 2 a.m. when that same teenager falls apart emotionally. No lectures, no "I told you so," just presence. That presence is intentional, because they remember what absence felt like. And yet, here's the paradox. Some Gen X parents still struggle with emotional expression. They didn't grow up with parents who modeled vulnerability. So even when they want to be emotionally available, it can feel unfamiliar. They may show love through action more than words. They'll drive across town at midnight. They'll rearrange work schedules. They'll sit in the bleachers quietly. But saying, "I'm proud of you," might still feel awkward. That's not indifference. That's inherited emotional muscle memory. And this is where the deeper psychology sits. Parenting isn't just about what you choose. It's about what lives in your nervous system. Gen X nervous systems were calibrated in autonomy. So when their child struggles, there's an internal conflict. Part of them thinks they need to figure this out. Another part whispers, "I don't want them to feel alone, like I did." That internal tension is constant. It's not visible on the outside, but it's there. And it explains why Gen X parenting sometimes looks contradictory. Firm but soft, detached but fiercely protective, calm but ready for battle if necessary. They are not helicopter parents. They are contingency parents. They stay in the background until it matters. And perhaps one of the most interesting aspects of Gen X psychology is their relationship with control. They grew up in environments where control was limited. Divorce rates climbed, economic shifts were abrupt, so they learned adaptability instead of certainty. That adaptability now translates into flexible parenting. They're less dogmatic about rigid rules than previous generations, but they're also less anxious about constant reassurance than younger ones. They don't need to curate a perfect childhood. They just want to make sure their kids feel seen. And feeling seen is different from being managed. It's quieter. It's subtler. It's showing up to the soccer game without making it your identity. It's listening to a rant about school without immediately solving it. It's trusting that your child can handle discomfort because you handled it too, but hopefully with a little more support. There's something else happening psychologically. Gen X parents often reflect on their own childhoods with surprising honesty. They're willing to say, "My parents did the best they could, but I needed more." That dual acknowledgement, gratitude without denial, is emotionally mature. It's not about blaming. It's about recalibrating. They're not trying to erase their upbringing. They're trying to edit it. Keep the resilience. Add the warmth. Keep the independence. Add the reassurance. Keep the toughness. Add the safety net. And that process is messy. It doesn't fit neatly into labels. It doesn't always align with trending parenting advice, but maybe that's exactly the point. Gen X has never been deeply interested in fitting into categories. They were the generation in between. Too young to be boomers, too analog to be millennials, they learned to navigate gray areas, and now they're raising children in a world that demands nuance. If you look closely, Gen X parenting isn't about perfection. It's about presence without performance. It's about letting your child try and fail without feeling abandoned. It's about being the adult you needed, without erasing the strength you built, and maybe that's the real psychology here. Gen X parents aren't trying to create fragile children. They're trying to create capable ones who also know they're loved. That combination, capability plus emotional security, is rare. It requires restraint. It requires reflection. It requires confronting your own childhood ghosts quietly, without making your child responsible for them. And that's difficult work, especially when no one really parented you that way. So if you're a Gen X parent and sometimes feel emotionally tired, it makes sense. You're rewriting a script that was never written for you. You're building a bridge between resilience and tenderness. You're proving that independence and involvement don't have to be opposites. They can coexist. And perhaps one day your children will look back and say, "They let me struggle, but I always knew they were there." And for a generation that once unlocked empty houses alone, that might be the deepest psychological repair of all. If this resonated with you, subscribe for more deep psychological explorations. And if you'd like to support these long-form analyses, consider becoming a member of the channel.